So I wanted to start with just a comment that was inspired by David's talk, which is about how this endeavor relates to mainstream economics. Economists are actually very keenly attuned to the difference between individual versus group level kind of mechanisms. And that can be exploited, I think, in a productive way. Friedman had this wonderful description of how the challenge in teaching economics is to get an individual who would experience, say, a fish market as being one where the price is not under your control, but you can buy any quantity of fish you want on any given day. How to take that individual and then help them understand that at the group level, what's actually going on is the quantity of fish is determined by what's unloaded from the boat, and the price is what gets determined by the market. So we think a lot about taking this individual level perspective and then mapping it into a very different kind of notion about what's going on at the level of the group. So if you take a student and you say, well, would it be a good thing for you if you could go to that fish market and the government made sure the price was low? And the intuition is, yeah, that would be great. Lower price, still buy as much as I want. But then you work them through, well, at the group level, this turns out differently. And when we talked about the invisible hand theorem, it was always contingent on a set of constraints. There were things that preserved good outcomes at the level of the group, and given those constraints, then individual level maximization can lead to good outcomes. And we were in this position that I think Dan Dennett called relying on a skyhook. We had some constraints. A lot of our work has been trying to understand how to map constraints into good outcomes, but we never had any clear sense about how, even if you knew what good constraints were, how they come about. What's the dynamic that operates at that kind of group level? And this is where I think we can plug into existing economics. Now, in that sense, I think what Bob Frank is doing is absolutely mainstream economics, which is just saying there might be something that feels like it's good for the individual, but when we look at the group level, turns out it's not so good, and we can change the constraints and get a better outcome. The thing that holds back, I think, the acceptance of Bob's work is that he's got a slightly richer model of individual behavior, and this is where I think economists need to be nudged. Is that our models of the individuals are too narrow, and that's, in a sense, what I'm going to talk about here. One way that this shows through is this narrow vision of behavior is that when economists think about the constraints, they always gravitate toward law, or law, regulation, external enforcement, and that, I think, really misses most of the action. So let me now start with kind of my talk. So I want to start this with a story. When I moved to New York about 3 years ago, I saw all these people crossing against the walk signal, and I had this just moralistic reaction, like, that's wrong. Like, you shouldn't do that. I came from California. We don't do that stuff. And there's obviously other places, like Zurich, Dusseldorf, where it's even stronger. No cars anywhere in sight, middle of the night. The walk sign says don't walk. You start to walk. The grandmother walking her dog says, stop that. This isn't New York. So, and what was interesting was that I was watching this feeling, and over the course of about 3 months living here in New York, that was completely extinguished. That moralistic feeling that this was wrong just went away. And so it's a sign of, I think, a high degree of plasticity at the individual level of these kind of moralistic reactions. But yet, what we see is extreme persistence at the group level. So this is, again, this dynamic of the group versus the individual. Let me show you another example of this persistence. This is geographic variation within Germany in anti-Semitism. So the darker colors have more intense indications of anti-Semitism basically in the 1900s, the 20th century. And this is strongly correlated with the patterns of pogroms in various parts of Germany during the 1300s that were induced by the Black Death. The Black Death comes in, kills 50, 70% of the population. In some localities, there's a conviction that it's the Jews who were these kind of suspicious kind of outsiders in society that might have caused this, and so there are pogroms where they'll burn Jews alive. And some places this happens, some they don't. 600 years later, you see persistence and variation in, say, the vote share for the Nazi Party. So we need to understand the mechanisms that can generate this kind of persistence. Another kind of persistence on about the same time scale is, in the Middle Ages, China is at roughly the 100th percentile in terms of income per capita. It's very technologically innovative. It's right at the frontier. Then up through the 1900s, it moves from being a position at the 100th percentile to being at something like the second, third, or fourth percentile in terms of income per capita. So this incredible persistence of social arrangements that seem clearly to be inefficient. And then your question comes to the fore, which why don't they just copy this stuff which is working so well in other places? This could lead you to think, well, I don't know, culture determines outcomes. Chinese culture is bad. Culture never changes. The Chinese are doomed. But yet we see in the 1970s, the late 70s, this incredible shift which completely transforms China. So we need a model of both extreme persistence of wildly inefficient behavior, but yet occasional kind of punctuated periods when the behavior changes. And that's what I want to try and outline here. Now, the model has some premises that I think are not worth trying to dispute because I don't have anything to add on these. So let's just stipulate these. So one, humans have this moral machinery that I alluded to with the story about the jaywalking that can solve prisoners' dilemma-type problems and facilitates cooperation. So I want to just stipulate that. Second, it has the form of a kind of a filing system where if somebody does a bad act, I'll feel like punishing that person. I'll also try not to do bad acts. But there's a process of cultural transmission that fills in or that assigns acts to those categories. So jaywalking might be a bad act in Dusseldorf, but it might not be a bad act in New York. So those things I want to just, as I said, just stipulate. Now, what I think should be in play in this discussion are the following assumptions. I'm going to assume that the social transmission mechanism is horizontal, not vertical. So it's not from parent to child. It doesn't have a dynamic which requires change across the generations. I'm not saying there's no vertical transmission, but I'm saying important parts of culture are transmitted horizontally. I want to assume that the dynamic, like the selection dynamic of cultural memes, is mostly conformist, but I need a little bit of the generation of rebels. This is kind of like mutation that just generates a little bit of variation within these societies. And I want to argue that this operates through this mental machinery of our feelings, or what economists would call preferences, rather than something like conscious thought and inference. And that one may be the most problematic. But those are what we should argue about. Now, if you give me those, I can make a model that operates like this. Think about pi as measuring the fraction of people in a population who believe it's a good thing to share. That if you have more food than others, you should share. If there's somebody else who's got more food, like brings down a big piece of protein, then that person should share. If they don't share, you hassle them, you steal from them, there's tolerated theft. And if there's this conformist transmission, if you start, say, at a low level of people who believe in sharing, then the model tells you start here. Well, that means next period you're going to start here, and then you converge to an equilibrium where almost nobody believes in sharing, but yet there are these few kind of deviants, rebels who come in every period and think, well, sharing might be a good thing. So you don't go all the way to zero in terms of people who believe sharing is a good thing. And the same way you can have a stable equilibrium at the high level. So we've generated multiple equilibria. You really could get a place where people think sharing is a really important thing to do with food. Another place people think sharing is not a good thing at all. And you can imagine a historical dynamic where, as say in one environment where risk is a huge problem for us to solve, norms that support sharing can provide a form of insurance and they're actually efficient. But then this new technology of cultivated grains and husbandry of animals changes the economic problem to one where sharing acts like a tax and individual property rights, individual ownership induce efficient effort. And so the external change could lead to a situation where there's persistent norms that support sharing, even though it's no longer the efficient thing to do. So the question is then, how might you get from an equilibrium where everybody is believing in sharing to one where a bunch of people don't believe in sharing and you get, the Neolithic revolution? The thing I think you have to add to this story is a model of basically it's like speciation. And this is a model very much inspired by the stuff that Pete and Rob have done, and also Alberto Bassine and others. But if you think of the biological kind of analog of this in genes, what you want to do is have this potential for an unoccupied niche to be populated by people who move out of this equilibrium. So suppose we're at this equilibrium where most people think it's good to share, and this turns out to be an inefficient thing to do. If you create a new equilibrium, say an entrepreneur says, or a new environment, the entrepreneur says, here it's going to be the laws, the pressure, everything is going to push in the direction of saying this is a place where we don't believe in sharing. So who will you attract if you open up this niche? It'll be, of course, the people who think that, I hope I said that right, this will be the place we don't believe in sharing. So you'll attract these people who think sharing is a stupid idea. So you get a small fraction of that population, but now they're the majority population in this new niche. So they basically start way down here, and they evolve into the new equilibrium where in this place people don't believe in sharing. Then, and it's the isolation that's critical here, because it's the average frequency of this belief in the people you run into that reinforces whatever your beliefs are. But then if this is more efficient, you can have a second level dynamic where there could be people from the sharing equilibrium who look and see, wow, standards of living are much higher in that place. If I go there, I'm going to feel kind of crappy because I think they should be sharing and they won't be sharing. But on the other hand, I'll have more food, my kids will have more food. So you can move for the material benefits. And then if you have this horizontal transmission of norms, you may know before you get there, you may not know, but when you get there, you're soon going to change in the way I changed. You're going to think, oh yeah, sharing it is really not such an important thing. So you can use this process of speciation or creating a startup as a way to attract, through selection, a set of kind of the rebels from the existing equilibrium. They become the new dominant kind of, their beliefs become the new dominant beliefs in the startup. If the startup is more efficient, then you'll get a second level of migration and socialization, and then the entire equilibrium can shift from the inefficient norm to the efficient one. Hang on to this for just a second. So what are the things that I think this kind of line of argument suggests? Well, first, it tells you how China got out of its trap with bad norms, and particularly norms that said it's wrong to go work for those running dog capitalists. Shenzhen, the Deng Xiaoping started a startup called Shenzhen, where this was a place that attracted the few Chinese who really believed it was a good idea to work with the running dog capitalists. Shenzhen attracted people from all over China. If you look at a linguistic map of China, everything else around Shenzhen speaks the Cantonese or Southern dialects, but in Shenzhen they speak Mandarin, because this was a place that attracted people from everywhere in China. It was a huge success in terms of the adoption of the market model, and then more and more people moved there, and then eventually there was another dynamic where other places copied the demonstrated success in Shenzhen. So I think this is something that could actually be implemented in other parts of the world where the norms are holding back better, more efficient outcomes. To think about this at a practical level, think about a place like Greece. And this is part of why it's important to think of this as operating at the level of feelings. People in Greece might say to each other, gee, we'd all be a lot better off if we all felt like it was a good thing to do to pay our taxes, to follow the law, to not engage in threats and, low-level kind of extortion. But they can't change their feelings any more than, like most of us can't change our feelings about whether it's okay to eat dogs or horses. just by thinking about it. This conscious discussion of the costs and benefits doesn't change these feelings. It's conceivable you could start a city in Greece which said, this is going to be the place where if you come here, it's going to be like Zurich. You know, the laws are going to be enforced very strictly. Don't come if you don't like that idea. It attracts the Greeks who believe in that, brings back some of the diaspora, of the people who left because they believed in that. Acts like Schengen, transforms all of Greece, potentially. Problem is that if you look forward in this century, there are only going to be about 2 million more urban residents in Greece. And so if you're going to start a new city that's going to be competitive at the scale of major cities these days, like 10 million people, you can't do it by serving a kind of an unserved market of people in Greece who want to live in cities. You have to like steal market share from Athens or maybe from the rest of the EU, and this is going to be disruptive and complicated. So this Schengen path, I think, is just not available in Greece. But then you think about Nigeria. Nigeria has 70 million people in cities right now. The UN forecasts, which are, I think, actually a little bit conservative, but the UN forecast is that by 2050, Nigeria will have 270 million people in urban areas. So, you know, you could start a dozen cities of the size of New York and Nigeria and still have a lot of people left over trying to go to Lagos. So, ironically, Nigeria might have better prospects for Schengen-style radical change in norms than a place like Greece. What's interesting about this time in human history is that in the next 100 years, we'll be able to do a lot of this. About 5 billion people are going to move into urban areas in the developing world. But after 100 years, this window's gone, and the whole world's going to be like Greece. And then we're going to have to deal with, instead of startups, we're going to have to do workouts of places with cultures that are messed up. Then I want to just conclude with, startups are not the only way to change norms. We see interesting examples of like top-down change in norms. The corruption in Hong Kong is a perfect example, and they actually had a lot of movement on corruption even within the first 5 years. So it was a case of very rapid change. The U.S. Army with the change in race relations is also, I think, equally dramatic. Roosevelt and the introduction of kind of entitlements is a fascinating story that I actually have written about how Roosevelt had to take the norm that had emerged as a reaction against the old norm that sharing is a good thing, this new norm that being on the dole, accepting charity is morally wrong. Roosevelt had to figure out how to change that norm to build a sustainable system of social transfers. And he created very effectively a set of entitlements through a kind of very subtle set of political manipulations that is so strong now that we're kind of trapped by this extremely strong sense of entitlement rather than the sense that this is charity, which is which is wrong in some sense. To conclude, this is a paper. This is a subsequent paper by Voth and his co-authors about anti-Semitism in Germany, and it contrasts the level of anti-Semitism in the American-controlled sector with the British-controlled sector. And just ignore the Soviet sector. But both the U.S. and Britain tried to go through this process of denazification in Germany. And in the U.S., there was a more heavy-handed attempt at doing this, which actually produced a backlash and was therefore less successful than the British sector, which was more of a light touch. When Giuliani apparently tried to limit jaywalking in New York, he started having the police in this heavy-handed way ticket people, and this also produced this big backlash where the norms got even more strongly reinforced in the other direction compared to where Giuliani was trying to move things. So if we don't understand the dynamics of these moralistic systems that humans have, we may fail to appreciate and take advantage of the power of startups, but two, we may implement measures using a simplistic model of, people just respond to incentives, heavy, strong incentives will get strong changes. If we have that incorrect model, then we're also going to make mistakes as we go about this more difficult process of trying to do workouts in existing cultures. Thanks.